And the plan is, once we finish through chapter 11, that's your typical breaking point or division, I should say. In Genesis, a lot of your commentaries are Genesis 1:11 and 12:50. So we'll probably take a little break. I'm open to any ideas that you have. I'd like to do a topical passage since we're doing so much exposition Monday through Friday with the devotions. And then Sunday morning, Sunday night, we're looking at 2 Old Testament books. So I'm thinking about doing the 12 disciples. See their story in the Bible, also what happens after the Bible. We may spend a few weeks doing that before returning. So it'll probably be the end of August by the time we finish chapter 11. That means 8 months for 11 chapters of the Bible. That's not too slow. If you have any complaints, it's Danny's fault. He's the one that told me my very first time here. I came on a Wednesday night because I didn't know what you guys did on Wednesday nights. We were still moving, and he told me y'all were halfway through after a year. I thought I could get used to that. So it is all his fault. And then whenever you started Sunday school in Hebrews, you're like, oh, this will keep me busy. Right? Good deal. So, all right, Genesis chapter 10. I think what we'll do, because it can be overwhelming, this is like reading the Hebrew phone book, that we'll take it in pieces, because I don't want to lose you, 10 minutes into this. So let's start with verse 1. It says, "These are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Sons were born to them after the flood." This, of course, is that language. These are the generations of the sons. We've talked about that before, so I don't want to rehash it. That phrase shows up throughout Genesis. It marks the beginning of a genealogy, but also marks the beginning of kind of a new story. This is really marking a bridge between the major story of Noah and a new story with the Tower of Babel, which leads into Abraham. And really what you could do, you could take chapter 10 and go to the end, skip the Tower of Babel narrative, and the latter half of chapter 11 is another genealogy of Shem. We'll talk about that a little bit today, but when we get to it, why that is. And then you go right into Abraham. The Tower of Babel interrupts the story flow. And we'll see why it does that and why it's so significant. So that means that chronologically what you don't have is this table of nations, the Tower of Babel, and then the genealogy of Shem. What you have is the Tower of Babel is in the middle of all this. Okay? In fact, Babel is mentioned. Nimrod is in here. He's a mighty warrior. He's connected to these 5 cities. It's much the same way that Ruth takes place during the time of the judges. So it's not like you have the time of the judges and then, oh yeah, let me tell you this what happens next. Here's the postscript, right? The mid-credit scene. There's your reference. And it's the story of Ruth. No, it's right there, kind of in the middle. But verse 1 of chapter 10 is a fulfillment of Genesis 9:19. I'll come to this map later. Genesis 9:19. "These 3 were the sons of Noah, and from these the people of the whole earth were dispersed." Now, so we see that this is the conclusion of the Noah story, but as with the way it's told, it's also the beginning of the Tower of Babel and the Abraham story, because the genealogy of Shem, you'll get from Shem and Eber, where we get Hebrews. You're eventually going to end up with Haran, who is the father of Abram. Right? So all of this is connected. It's a passage really good at bridging all of this. So you remember that God promised Noah that from his 3 sons, all the nations of the earth will be dispersed. And remember that dispersed picks up creation language. Be fruitful and multiply, right? We usually have that part memorized, don't we? But we forget the part about filling the earth. What God didn't want was everyone to hang out in Possum Ridge, Orrington, right? He didn't want everyone there, right? Rather, the idea was to fill the earth. And remember, that is the original vision of Eden. Eden was not just the nicest garden in the world. The idea was that as the borders of Eden would expand, God's presence would expand with humanity and fill the earth. And that's what Israel was supposed to be. So you have the temple in Jerusalem right here in the middle. As their borders expand, so does the law of God and the presence of God among the nations. And so Israel was come and see, right? So this is Queen of Sheba coming in, and all of that. That is, as the nations come and see, the borders will be expanded, all that sort of stuff. Well, it never happens, of course. But what is the promise of the Great Commission? Go into all the world and preach the gospel to the nations. The executive board meeting association Monday, that we had a missionary come speak, and he did Acts 1a about the remotest parts of the earth. He said, let me tell you where the remotest parts of the earth is. It's in Idaho, right? And he told us like where some of these tribes and other villages were. And I'm like, well, that's probably what Jesus had in mind when he said that, right? And I thought, trying to think that place name just left me. Anyways, you don't care. It was a joke anyways. So we're going to spend a lot of time on this map, just introducing it here. This divides Ham's region, Sham's region, Japheth's region. We'll look at each of these. But I will warn you, I don't have all the answers to all your questions, okay? This is fairly generic. I'll show you where I got this map. If it's from a Bible atlas I have, but when I say Bible atlas, I'm not just talking about a little skinny thing with a bunch of maps. It's very detailed. Get it at Boyce. It's really, really good book. So if this interests you, if you want to know where this information is coming from, it ain't coming from me, right? The guy's smarter than me by a lot. I want to start with just a number of, I call fast facts because I listen to a podcast that use that language. But just a couple things that I didn't know where else to put it, so I'm just going to put it right at the beginning. First thing you know is that Genesis 10 is not a genealogy. So yes, you will get Japheth had these sons and they had sons, right? So I think Japheth's genealogy goes to the third or fourth generation. Ham's goes to the third or fourth generation. Sham's will eventually go a little farther, especially when you add chapter 11 to it. But it's more complicated than just a genealogy. It's actually, though it's in a genealogical style, it's an ethnographic writing. That is to say that what's being described here aren't people, but ethnicities, cities, people groups, language groups. So you don't. It's not just about Canaan, the son of Ham. It's about the Canaanites. It's about the Hittites, the Hivites, the Jerusites. The Egyptians are mentioned here. The Babylonians are mentioned here. The Europeans are mentioned here. We'll get to. That's the struggle. Sometimes it's names being mentioned. Sometimes it's cities being mentioned, probably named after someone, like Frankfort, right? Or Owen County is named after Abraham Owen, and sometimes named after nations, like we've transliterated for Egypt, or some of your Bibles do. Some of them just says Egypt, but it's transliteration in a lot of your Bibles. So sometimes it's just the nation itself, or the people group, or whatever. So there is some back and forth on that. By the way, this is unique in the ancient Near Eastern culture. I didn't know this. You will not find another document like this in the ancient Near Eastern culture. The Greeks tried something like this, so you can get something like this in the Greeks. But you're not going to find it in the Sumerians, which we'll get to. You're not going to get it with the Canaanites. You're not going to get it with the Egyptians. But the Jews, the Hebrews, who play center stage in this table of nations, they alone provide this. And from what I've been able to study, I'm not an expert on this. This is not something I've spent a lot of my life looking into. From what I can tell, it's pretty accurate. Like I think even among secular resources, there seems to be some pretty good accuracy here. And I think there's reasons for that, but we'll get there. We also need to see that this, one good way to see this genealogy, if we can use that word, is that it's not a vertical genealogy. That is, son of, son of, son of, son of, right? It's very vertical. So the genealogy of chapter 5, or the Jesus one's very vertical. One is son of, the other is father of, father of. This is more horizontal. So someone may have a son, but out of that son comes a people group, right? So you're not getting every name. You didn't get every name in chapters 4 and 5 either. Second thing is, this is fascinating to me, that is the emphasis on 70. So there are 70 names included in chapter 10 alone. Right? So if I mispronounce 1 or 2 or 20 of them, I still think that's a pretty good percentage. But 70 is a significant number in the Bible. I think I can prove it to you. So Here's how to break down. 26 from Shem, 30 from Ham, 14 from Japheth. So right away, hopefully you can get where we're going with this, right? So Shem is where the Hebrews are coming from. So Shem is, the Shemites are the Semites, right? So this is going to be significant. And we'll play a part, chapter 11, the genealogy going on into Abraham, who is a descendant of Shem. Ham is the bad guy, if you will. Remember the good seed versus bad seed? So from the Hamites, you're going to get all the bad characters, like in the land of Canaan. Now remember, when Moses is writing this, they are marching to Zion, right? They're marching to Canaan, and what they discover here, these are the Hamites, right? And there's all these little people groups, all streams. So you're going to get a lot more of them, because these are their neighbors. Egypt, Mizraim, comes from the Hamites. Well, guess who enslaved? You remember the promise was, I'm already ahead of myself. The promise was that Ham will be a servant to Shem. But what happens in Exodus? Shem becomes a servant to Ham, a slave to Ham. It's just beautiful writing to me. I don't know. And then Japheth, no one cares because that's the white Europeans, and we all know what's wrong with them, right? You know, among other things. But in case, I guess, you know, I'm Scott-Irish, so I guess this is our dude here. They don't play as a significant role really until the New Testament with the Romans and the Greeks as well. So they're not as prominent here. So you got 70. There's 70 names here. So we start with 70 nations, or whatever you want to call them, cities, people groups, languages, whatever. And later on there are 70. This is the end of Genesis. There are 70 descendants of Jacob. Named, right? That doesn't mean there's literally 70. And if someone were to uncover a name we don't have in the Bible, all of a sudden the Bible isn't legit. There's a theme going on in the Bible. So you get in Genesis 46, all the persons belonging to Jacob who came into Egypt, who were his own descendants, not including Jacob's sons' wives, were 66 persons in all. And the sons of Joseph who were born to him in Egypt were 2. All the persons of the house of Jacob who came into Egypt were 70. So notice that these are the ones who came into Egypt. And you start Exodus chapter 1. Here you have 70. What's going to happen? They're going to leave Egypt. All right? And the emphasis is again on 70. 70 came in, and now we're going to get the story how the 70 left. Now we know there's more than 70 that leave Egypt. There's like millions apparently. But the emphasis is again on 70. So what you have is sort of bookends, don't you? Genesis, at this point in chapter 10, starts with the 70 nations, climaxing in chapter 12, verse 1, with one of those nations, the descendant of Hebrews. His name's Abram. And it ends with not 70 nations, but 70 names from one of those nations. And it is through this nation that God will bless the nation. So of the 70, God will bless the 70. Isn't that fascinating? By the way, it doesn't end there. There's also 70 elders of Israel. So you get in Exodus 24. Then he said to Moses, "Come up to the Lord, you and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu." They're going to, die in Numbers, I believe. And 70 of the elders of Israel worship from afar. All right. So again, there's 70 elders. There are Luke chapter 10. There is 70 witnesses of Jesus. You know the story, right? After this, the Lord appointed 72. Oops, it's a typo. I'm just curious. If you're quick at finding a verse, so Mark, since you got your phone, if you use your Bible app, or you got your message, will you look at Luke 10:1? This is ESV. I was wondering if anyone has 72 or 70. You can find it. I meant to ask you earlier. So Message has 70. ESV has 72. Y'all have anything else? You got 72. What is yours? NIV? New King James is 70. Now let's be honest. There's a difference between 70 and 72. So why is there such a discrepancy? This is one of those manuscript issues. Some manuscripts have 70, some manuscripts have 72. Well, I never had an opinion on this because I think it's rather insignificant. They're both even numbers, and they went 2 by 2. But if we're consistent with the 70s, then this gives credence to the 70. Jesus sends out 12 or 70 witnesses, 70 disciples. There's also 70 members of the Sanhedrin who will ultimately execute Jesus. One other thing, the Septuagint. Do you want to ever seen this Roman numeral in your Bible? Not in the text. So you're not going to read, for God so loved the world, LXX, that he gave his only begotten Son. But what you may have is a footnote that says LXX reads whatever. Or Paul is quoting from the LXX. Anyone ever seen that before? If you ever kick me out of this church, my one goal is that you guys start reading your footnotes in your Bible. I want you to be that nerdy with your Bible, right? You'll see this all over the place. If you have any footnotes, now you King Jamers, you're not going to get this more than likely, unless it's a study Bible, because they don't do a lot of manuscript stuff in King Jimmy. But what this means is 70. So it's the Roman numeral 50, 10, 10, 70. All right? I mean, not to insult your intelligence. The reason this is the symbol for the Septuagint, because no one can spell Septuagint. Right? I tried it. I had to Google it. Okay, and I have an idea what letters are in the word, and I still can't spell it. But LXX is the abbreviation for Septuagint, because the story goes that 70 Hebrew Greek scholars, so they would have spoken Greek, but they were Hebrew scholars, before the time of Jesus, sat down to translate the Bible from the Old Testament, from the Hebrew into the Greek. There were 70 of them, and the legend is they all came back with their translation, and they agreed completely. That probably didn't happen, but that's the story. So we call the Septuagint the 70. Isn't that fascinating? Why 70? Well, maybe this is connected to this theme. 70, of course, is connected to the idea of completion and all that. So all of this reaffirms the statement that all the families, nations, peoples, tribes, and languages trace their lineage to these three sons and their father Noah. Right? The third thing to note here is this is a selective genealogy or ethnographic language. That is that Moses largely includes names that would be of interest to Israel, and so the Japheth whateverites, they're not as prominent because no one cares about what's happening in Ireland when you're trying to take over the land of Canaan, right? There may not be anybody there, as far as I know. But St. Patrick isn't around yet, so who cares about them, right? And the Vikings aren't around yet, so who cares, right? Beowulf isn't saving the world yet. So what is of interest is the Hamites, because they're the ones that Moses and them are going to have to deal with. Last thing, in this regard, the emphasis is on the ancestry of Israel. In fact, notice chapter 10, verse 1. I haven't forgotten about that verse. What's the order there? It's Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now, that's your order, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Starting in verse 2, we get the sons, not of Shem, who came first in verse 1, but Japheth. Starting in verse 6, we get the sons of Ham. And going down to verse 21, we get the sons of Shem. It reverses the order. So the chapter begins with Shem, is mentioned first, and ends with Shem, who's mentioned last. He's the focus of it, which makes sense. Like if you're going to write a story of American history, you're probably not going to spend all your time on China. Not until the 21st century, am I right? Yeah. You start talking about national debt and pandemics, right? Right, it's not all that significant about the founding of America. You'll do a lot about European history, Western societies, right? Maybe do some about African history in order to provide a context with American slavery. Right, you may do that, but you're not going to be too worried about Mother Russia, right? So if you're Moses and you're a Hebrew writing to Hebrews about their collective story, the emphasis is going to be on your story. This is who we are and whatnot. So, by the way, Jesus is a descendant of Shem. This is kind of obvious. Just so you recognize the names. We'll talk a lot about Peleg, Eber. So this is where we get Hebrews. There's Shem, Noah. Right. So that's right there in the Luke traces the lineage of Jesus back to Adam. Okay, let's start with the descendants of Japheth. So we'll start in verse 2. The sons of Japheth, Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, and Teres. The sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz, Ripheth, and Togarmah. The sons of Javan, Elisha, with an H there at the end, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim. From these the coastland people spread in their lands, each with his own language, by their clans and their nations. Notice the reference to language there. Yes?
I got not a question. But that guy, the son of Gomer, was Ashkenaz. Eastern European Jews are called Ashkenazi Jews.
Interesting.
It is. I just wondered if there's, I don't know, I just brought that, but yeah, in Europe there's two kinds of Jews. I can't think of the Western, but Eastern European Jews are called Ashkenazi.
If you're interested in this, I've got a book. It's pretty good. It's called The Tower of Babel from the Creation Museum. He's got a whole chart and everything with all these names.
I just thought that was kind of...
Yeah, it's interesting. And we'll see other examples where I'll show you. Well, actually, I think the next thing I have is actually Gomer. So this is Europeans, among other things. Here's the map. Here's Japheth up here at the top for the most part. So you're going to, this is really going to be, for most part, the Roman world. But most of the Bible, the great nations are coming from, like over here, mostly. Of course, Egypt's over here. A lot of them coming up here, Babylon, Assyria, whatnot. But New Testament, and today, it's going to be your European countries up here. That's Japheth. One of the things that's fascinating, you mentioned Gomer, is Gomer is probably, from what we can tell, is the guy where we get the Europeans. Now, remember in Hebrew, there are no vowels. So when you see a Hebrew word, you're really looking at the consonants. That's the foundation of the word. What we would call vowels, they don't really have. That is how you're going to inflect a word, from noun to verb to participle and all that sort of stuff, and which makes it really complicated and why I didn't do well in Hebrew. But you'll notice Gomer, the three consonants, G, M, R, the same as Germany. So, assuming this is right, I came across it today in a reliable source. I'm going to assume it's true. It very well could be that this lineage still holds true today. So, blame Japheth for Hitler, I guess. But Kittim is probably refers to Kidion on Cyprus. Javan represents the Ionians. Tarshish refers to the region as far west as Spain. So go back here. Spain is over here. Now, where do we get Tarshish? Is Jonah. Right? That's where he wants to go. He wants to go far away from the Shemites into the descendants of Japheth, as far west as he could go. And there's some debate as to exactly where Tarshish is. Tubal, Meshech are regions in Anatolia. Now, this is significant because Meshech and Tubal show up in prophecy. So, Danny can help you and answer all this sort of stuff. So, for example, in Ezekiel 38, Son of man, set your face toward Gog and the land of Magog. You usually hear Gog Magog because the Battle of Armageddon, or Harmageddon, technically, it's the mountain of Megiddo, or Mount Megiddo. It mentions Gog and Magog, which takes us back to Ezekiel 38, which mentions Gog, Magog, Meshech, and Tubal. And they would be, so if you're a dispensationalist, so like Left Behind and stuff, what you have is Russia and the Arab nations. Am I getting this right, Daniel? That they're going to attack Israel, right? Now, in Left Behind, that is what eventually leads to the rapture, which, if I'm reading the Bible right, is what leads to Armageddon at the end. But it makes for an awesome opening scene in the Left Behind movie. And it's from this. So you see these names. So what you need to see here is the nation isn't called Gog, Magog, Meshech, Tubal. But Ezekiel was picking up on the table of nations, saying that people group, right, who descend from this individual city, whatever, is coming from that. So that's Japheth. What about the descendants of Ham? So let's do verse 6 to 20. See how bad I can butcher this. Sons of Ham, Cush, Egypt. Does anyone have Mizraim after Cush? What do you have, Katrina? New King James? So Mizraim, New King James. NIV has Mizraim? Yeah. Yeah. All right, Don, you're the standard bearer of translations. Is it Egypt or Mizraim?
Egypt.
Okay, well that makes sense. Yeah, the word, it's the Hebrew transliteration, Mizraim. It's Egypt. So when you get the Exodus, in Hebrew it says Mizraim, you translated Egypt. For some reason, in a lot of our translation, we just transliterate it. The what does?
The net.
Oh, the Net Bible? Oh, cool. Yeah. Now, I like Mizraim because it's fun to say, but it's just Egypt. So the guy's name isn't Egypt, more likely. But what? So if you're reading this as a Jew, in the wilderness, where you've grown up your entire life, and granddad's told you what slavery was like in Mizraim, you're like, well, I don't know where they're from. No wonder. This is the people that cursed Noah, right? I mean, or were cursed by Noah. So that's quite the legacy. Put, this guy played golf. And Canaan, we read his story last week in chapter 9. The sons of Cush, Seba, Havilah, Sapta, Ramah, and Sabtika. The sons of Ramah, Sheba, and Dedam. Cush fathered Nimrod. He was the first on earth to be a mighty man. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. By the way, there's two ways to read that. One is a good thing, means that he was a mighty hunter before the Lord. That's a common phrase. In the Lord means before the Lord. Or it means he was against the Lord. After all, he is a Hamite. Therefore, it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Chaldea in the lands of Shinar. We'll come back to Nimrod, but while I'm thinking of it, there's two ways to read this. One is, he is the king of Babel during the Tower of Babel sequence. Or it is to say, after that narrative, he's such a mighty man, he becomes the head of these 5 cities. Most notable that of Babel. All right. But we'll have more to say about it. Verse 11. From that land he went into Assyria and built Nineveh, Rehoboth, Calah, and Resen between Nineveh and Calah. And this is the great city. Egypt fathered Nudim, Anamim, Lahabim, Naphtuhim, Pathrusim, Casluhim, from whom the Philistines came, and Caphtorim. By the way, whenever you see im like that, that is plural. That is the Hebrew S. So the guys' names aren't Bob's, Robert's, Jimmy's, Timmy's. You know, that's not their names, but their people group. It's the people of Bob, the Bobs, right? I mean, you know, they're all tomatoes. So just a reminder, this is a horizontal genealogy, not a vertical one. So whenever Jonah is told to go to the Ninevites, Jonah's a good Jewish boy. What comes to his mind? Aren't they cursed? Now, not technically, because it's Canaan that's cursed, not Ham. But still, they're the bad brother. They're the one that you only invite to Christmas, but you hope he doesn't come. Yeah, we all have those. Canaan. So here's remember he's cursed. Canaan fathers Sidon, his firstborn, and Heth, and the Jebusites, the Amorites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, the Archites, and the Sinites. Now, do those names sound familiar? Yeah, they're the ones that are going to cause all the problems for Israel, which makes sense because we read about it in chapter 9. Cursed is your son Canaan. They're going to cause all the problems. The Arvadites, the Zemarites, and the Hamathites. Afterward, the clans of the Canaanites dispersed. So that word shows up over and over again, or language like that in chapter 10, of course, and which leads to the Tower of Babel. The territory of the Canaanites extended from Sidon in the direction of Gerar, as far as Gaza, that's significant in Israel, and in the direction of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim, as far as Lasha. Now, why is that important? Because in about 9 chapters, we're going to meet the descendants of Ham through Canaan, and they're going to try to wipe out the nephew of Abraham, Semite. This is the story of Cain and Abel. You get the Sodom and Gomorrah, essentially. These are the sons of Ham by their clans, their languages, their lands, and their nations. I just want to point out a couple of things. One, Cush is Ethiopia. Mizraim is Egypt, we said. Put is Libya. Here is, again, the map. Here are the Hamites. But remember we talked about the curse of Canaan is an African curse. This is why. They go into Egypt and everywhere else. Egypt, Africa, and everywhere else. But it isn't limited there. So we zero in here. This is the land of actual Canaan. That's not Africa, it's the Middle East. And here are those nations. You'll recognize the Perizzites, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Jerusites, and the Girgashites. Right? And so guess who keeps bothering Israel throughout their history? It's these clans. And whenever they go into the promised land, they have to deal with these people groups. So remember what Moses' motivation for a lot of this. From Cush comes Ramah, Sheba, and Dedan. According to Ezekiel, these three occupy the Arabian Peninsula. We won't read these verses, but you can. But I do want you to see how the Bible will occasionally not speak of a nation, but speak of them by their ancestor. So Israel is one of the ways we do that. Jacob's name is changed to Israel. So sometimes in the Old Testament, you'll read about the Israelites. Sometimes they'll be called Israel will be called Jacob. So they're not. You don't go to the land of Jacob now, right? It's not what they're called. They're called the Israelites. But when you call them Jacob, you're calling back their ancestral heritage. And so it's like God using a middle name, I guess, right? Israel, Jacob, I don't know. What do we do now? We broke the Ten Commandments. We always do that. They do the same thing in Ezekiel 38. Cush, from Cush comes Nimrod, whom the author pays particular attention. We've talked about it a little bit. Babel eventually becomes Babylon, which is going to be the primary headache for Israel later on, particularly with Don was going through Jeremiah in Sunday school. Daniel, of course, going through, living through all that significant event. Secular historians say that Sargon of Agade, I don't know how you say that, is considered to be the first king of Babylon. It very well may be that this is the Nimrod they have in mind. It may date roughly around the same time. I'm not an expert on any of that stuff. Eric becomes Uruk, U-R-U-K. Calais is Nimrud. Each is located in Mesopotamia, and they are found in Shinar. I want to go back to this map. So Shinar is right here. This is where, so you see Babylon, Shinar, this is the Akkadians, all of them are going to come from right here. This, of course, is the Tigris and Euphrates River, two of the most significant rivers in the ancient Near Eastern culture, that and the Nile, essentially. It's because of that Babylon becomes Babylon, that they are able to build off of that. Remember, those two rivers were mentioned in the Garden of Eden, along with two others. It's a very significant area of the Fertile Crescent. Shinar, that name we now understand to be Sumer, where we get what is considered the first real civilization of man, the Sumerians. So it's coming from a descendant of Ham. So the Sumerians is very important in terms of human history, what goes on there. Ham's son Mizraim is described verse 13 and 14. We can't define or identify most of the names that are found there, unfortunately, but Casluhim becomes the Philistines. So like in Amos 9:7, you're not like the Cushites to me. O people of Israel, declares the Lord, did I not bring up Israel from the land of Egypt, and the Philistines from Caphtor, and the Syrians from Kir? You can see, oftentimes they'll go back to the table of nations for this. Jeremiah does this, where there's cited mentioned here. The Lord is destroying the Philistines, the remnant of the coastland of Caphtor. Caphtor and Philistines are the same people. Right? Now that doesn't make sense, right? You just read that and you're thinking Caphtor, whatever that is, and you just move on. If you've been reading your Bible, you can see what he's doing there. He's reminding the reader of their ancestry, going all back to Ham. So the Philistines are connected to the name Caphtorim, or that is Crete, where Paul will land shipwreck. And by the time of the Exodus, the Philistines, or the people of Caphtorim, settled in the coastal plains of Palestine. So you get this in Deuteronomy 2. As for the Avim, who lived in the villages as far as Gaza, which we saw here, the Caphtorim, who came from Caphtor, destroyed them and settled in their place. Guess who bothers David and Saul the most? The Caphtarims, the Philistines. And who are they? Descendants of Ham. Okay. Verses 15 to 20, Ham's sons are described. Almost all the names bear an ethnic ending. Some are obscure, some are well known. Sidon is an important port city on the coast of Phoenicia. Sidon is often a symbol for the entire region. Deuteronomy 3, Joshua 13. Heth is an individual and probably the ancestor of the Hittites. They're a big thorn in the side, aren't they? Hittites, constantly. From Archite to Hamathite, likely refers to the city of Syrophoenician area. Thus, part of Canaan's posterity settled in north and northwest of modern-day Israel. So clearly, Moses wants the reader to identify with the geographical locations they will soon conquer. Right? So yes, he has all this, but he's going to spend a lot of his time right here because Israel is somewhere between here and there, right? So they read this and think, okay, this is who we got to deal with. It was them, if you trace them back far enough, the ones that put us in slavery. But that was not the blessing from God. Now we must get our land back. This is our land given to Abraham, the Shemite. So we get the descendants of Shem. The full tale is interrupted of the Shemites with the Tower of Babel. So we'll look at that a little bit next week. But it picks up chapter 11, verse 10. We will look at it later time. Eber gets a lot of attention in this, so let's start in verse 21. To Shem also the father of all children of Eber, the elder brother of Japheth, children were born. The sons of Shem, Elam, Asher, Arpachshad, Lud, Aram, the sons of Aram, Uz, Hul, Gether, Mosh. Arpachshad fathered Shelah, and Shelah fathered Eber. To Eber were born two sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided. And his brother's name was Joktan. Joktan fathered Almadad, Sheleph, Hazar Marveth, Jerah, Hadaram, Uzal, Diklah, Abal, Abimael. My father is. Someone Google Abimael. It's my father is something, and that is going to bother me. Something of God. My father is something of God. Google that, and hopefully they're right. Sheba, Ophir, not to be confused with Oprah, Havilah, Jabab. All these were the sons of Joktan. The territory in which they lived extended from Misha in the direction of Sephar, to that's the guy from Aladdin, to the hill country of the east. These are the sons of Shem by their clans, their languages, their lands, and their nations. Again, notice the reference to languages because the Tower of Babel's already happened. So we are back here. Has anyone looked up Abimael? Was that what it was? Yeah, Abimael.
Which verse was that?
It is verse 28. Y'all thought I was kidding. I really want someone to Google that. Abimael. Abimael. My father is something God. This is bothering me.
My father is God.
My father is God. It's okay. Good. So Abi or Avi is my God, or my father. El is God. So Elohim, Elijah, Elisha, right? El Shaddad, all that. So my father is God. Man, I bet his dad named him that. You know? Father sent from God. Is that so? The NIV says that. Okay. Father sent from God. All right. Good deal. It's one of those. Good deal. All right. Okay. All right. So Eber gets most of the attention here. That's where we get the Hebrews. Elam relates to the Elamites who were located in southeastern neighbor of ancient Assyria. So the Elamites show up quite a bit. That story in the Old Testament. Ashur becomes the city on the Tigris River in Mesopotamia. The Arameans descend from Aram. So that's significant. The Lydians in Anatolia come from Lud. Some debate regarding that. Arpachshad is difficult to determine. Most assume it's the Chaldeans. So when you read the story of Job, that may be from that guy with the weird name, or a difficult name for us English American speakers. Peleg. So what verse was Peleg in there again? 25. So 25, to Eber was born two sons. The name of one was Peleg. For in his days the earth was divided. Now what in the world does that mean? The name Peleg means division. So in his days the earth was divided. But what does it mean the earth was divided? Right? Did God just take an axe and cut it in half? What happened? So as you can imagine, there's a lot of views regarding this. So instead of me giving them to you, I'm just going to read to you from the Curate book. Peleg is listed as one of the sons of Eber. The verb for was divided is a wordplay on his name. The Hebrew three root consonant of the verbs are PLG. So the verb and the noun PLG. So it's a wordplay. It came Peleg, and in his day Peleg. The idea that the earth was divided during his day may be a reference to chapter 9, verse 19, in which the dispersion of humanity in the earth is declared. That makes sense. Division, dispersion. And that's the main theme of chapters 10 and 11, is dispersion. And out of that dispersion, God chooses one man to one day, we'll see this next week with Tower of Babel, to bring the nations back together. And that's, of course, Jesus. It may also anticipate Genesis 11, 1, and that's Tower of Babel, and the dispersion that occurred at Babel. So it could be, if you go back to the map, Babel is over here in Babylon. Where did the diversion happen? It happened where the Shemites went off to. So this could be a reference. This is probably what I hold to, but it's not a dogmatic issue. So it's perhaps a reference to that. Others believe it may refer to some topographical disturbance, such as an earthquake or plate movement. Contextually, the interpretation of population movement has much support. So what that last one is y'all ever hear of Pangea?
Supercontinent?
Yeah. So you got a couple options, you young Earth creationists. Okay, I go back and forth. So wish Lane were here, because he has to be our representative because he works at the Ark for Answers in Genesis. The division either happened during the Ark itself, so you have water coming from below. And the argument goes that there you have the division of the continents. Okay, that leads to an ice age, all that sort of stuff. That's the young Earth creationist. And then there's this weird verse. You can't attach Peleg to Noah, right? He ain't around then. So some catastrophic event happened leading to the division of the continents. I think that's a bit out there for that. I think this is probably referenced more towards Peleg. But some have used this. I think the Bodie Hodge book I'm reading on Tower of Babel, I've read and used, I don't think he holds to this, even though he's a young Earth creationist. So that verse just sticks out to me. It's so bizarre, isn't it? That was in the day the earth was divided, so apparently Trump was president. It's okay, Republicans. I'll make fun of the Democrats soon enough. And the descendants of Joktan are the ancestors of various Arabian tribes. So it's interesting that if I'm reading this right, the Arabs and the Israelites hate each other, if I'm reading my news right. If I'm reading my Bible right, they have the same ancestry. Then chapter 10, verse 32, there's 2 points being made here. These are the clans of the sons of Noah according to their genealogies and the nations, and from these the nations spread abroad the earth after the flood. 2 things. One is an inclusio. The same language used here in verse 32 was used in verse 1. So it just brings it to a close, even though you're going to have a continuation at the end of chapter 11. The other reason is because it sets up the Tower of Babel narrative. So you have the nations are dispersed, but then chapter 11 is going to tell you how they were dispersed by the division of language. So it concludes this ethnographic writing and also introduces the Tower of Babel, which gives more detail. So the Tower of Babel was like Genesis 2. Genesis 2 is a zeroing in on day 6 of what was told in Genesis 1. You got something similar going on here. So here's the question. If you're not wore out yet, then I didn't do a very good job, because I'm exhausted from studying all this. Why does any of this stuff matter? I mean, I love history, ancestral stuff, all this sort of stuff, but does it really matter? I want to offer, I got 4 reasons we can go through really brief. You may even get out on time. One is because this matters. This is the national debt leading up to 2016 election. I'm afraid that the chart wouldn't fit to put the year 2020 on there, right? And you're going to get another stimulus package, probably after the election, of course. And that number is just going to keep going up. Why does that matter? Americans are terrible at thinking about future generations, because we don't care about past generations, and we couldn't care less about future generations. Think about it. A few years ago, there was a big fight over retirement and pension payments, right? Why? Because the government was taking your pension. Why was the government taking your pension? Because elections don't matter what happens 20, 30, 40 years later. What happens is what happens 2020, the election now. This is how you get a deficit like this. This starts in 1970. Here it is in 2016. Now it's up to about $25 trillion. Someone's got to pay for that. And we all know how you pay for it, right? Not to sound Dave Ramsey, is you spend less than you take in. And you want to know how you're going to fix that? You're going to have to get rid of Social Security. You're going to have to cut the military. You're going to have to cut Medicare, Medicaid. You're going to have to cut everything, because the government's spending $1 trillion more than what it's bringing in. All these other nations have to do, from China, Japan, Belgium, Europe, and everyone else, is say, we want our money with interest. Then what are we going to do? It may be true that if you owe the bank $1,000, they own you, but if you owe the bank $1 billion, you own them. That's only true for so long. Eventually, getting that $1 billion back is awfully tempting, at least a portion of it. And if a nation is bent on destroying ours, this is a good way of doing it. So every time it comes up, we need to make cuts because someone gets a libertarian bent for once. What happens? People riot in the streets, because at the end of the day, we don't care about generations 5 down the road. We'll be dead before then. And so our kids and grandkids and great-grandkids and all that is going to suffer because of our unwillingness to face something like this. What do we see here? The story is, hey, Ham, because of what you did, it's not just your child, but your grandchildren, children after that, and this will be a problem moving forward. So the decisions you make now will affect future generations. Of course it does. You think the assassination of Abraham Lincoln affected the history of America? Yeah, it kind of did. Kind of did. You think the choosing of George Washington to be the general of the rebellious armies in America kind of important? Yeah. Making him the first president and not John Adams or Thomas Jefferson was kind of important? Yeah. Yeah. Very significant. All these decisions have ripple effects. How we live our lives affects future generations. That's why when we raise our kids, we're not babysitters, we're parents. From the words we choose to use, the way we act, and the decisions we make will affect future generations, because you're going to turn into your parents. And everything you assume is normal about life, you get from your parents. And if you think, well, I didn't know my dad, so he didn't affect me, yeah, by the fact you bring it up shows that not having a dad did affect you. If you still don't believe me that fatherlessness affects people, you need to turn on the TV every once in a while. That has ripple effects to last generations. Because what's going to happen is, chances are, that little girl of yours you've ignored, probably going to have kids without a daddy too, if the statistics are consistent. So this is just one example, but you get this here. So it starts out well. There's one dad, 3 boys, teach them all well, but when one of them goes off, the rails fall off of that generation. But the Shemites are at least somewhat pretty good. And who cares about the descendants of Jephthah there? All right, the second reason this, I got a good illustration. I mentioned your Social Security. My father, when I was at home late last night, Dad just discovered that the federal government has taken money out of Social Security to pay for other things. I don't know where he's been. Of course, I'm very libertarian, or not very, but I'm pretty libertarian. So I said, Dad, that's why you should have never trusted someone else with your money. Right? Your retirement. Why did you trust it with the government? but he wasn't around in the 1940s. But nevertheless, we say, welcome to the party, Dad. Because no one cares about your retirement. They care about this pet project. The second reason this matters is because this matters. This is my Ancestry.com DNA thing, so I don't think there's any private information on there. So this is where I come from. So I'm Scottish, and you see Virginia, of course, obviously Kentucky, this is where I live. But have any of you all done this? It's fascinating stuff. You can find relatives you didn't know you even had. I don't have it set up on Ancestry where I get these strange emails like, there's some dude you need to meet. Like, no, I'm not going to do that. But it's great if you do that.
How far back does it go? Like, how many generations?
Yeah.
Or will it give you generations back? Will it give you names? Like,
No, it doesn't give you names. I think you can do that. So there is a story. I mean, we're going to get a little late, but who cares? You're state workers. You're not going to work tomorrow anyways. But it's possible that I'm not even a McDaniel. There's been some DNA studies. So I have a relative that I'm close to, and they met someone else who have a different genealogy. But there's a connection somewhere, and they were able to trace it. So we can trace the McDaniels, because we're not really McDaniels, the McDaniels back so far. And what we think happened was he is the offspring of rape. And from what we can tell, we just don't have enough information. It's possible that a traveling Methodist minister from Illinois, I believe it was, adopted him, and John Franklin took the last name McDaniel. So it's possible we're not even McDaniels. And this family's from Germany, which makes sense, considering what you got going on there. So that's what the DNA has done, is my relative has the DNA, give me your email, all that sort of stuff. And it's been fascinating for my aunt and others. I just don't want that email. I don't have time for all that. But what is significant is when I see this map, you all know a lot of the research I've done on my family and the ministers is I can trace from this map why I am a Southern Baptist right now. The first Protestant that I've been able to trace in my family started right here in Scotland. A guy by the name of John Craig. He was a colleague of John Knox. I've written a whole book on it because he wrote some catechisms that were influential in Scotland. John Knox famously made the Queen cry. John Craig famously made King James cry. He was a chaplain for King James until the year 1600, which is the year he died. So that's the first Protestant. He's Presbyterian, bless his heart. He got most things wrong, just not some of the more important things. But you read the catechism, and man, I agree with all of the Christian stuff and none of the Presbyterian stuff, right? But it's really good. I do like it. Well, eventually, his descendants, a guy by the name of Taliaferro Craig, or Tolliver Craig, gets on a boat somehow. He may have been born on the boat, born before on the boat. His dad may have died on the boat. I don't know, make up your story. He lands in Virginia. He's a good actually, he's Episcopalian, actually. He likely ended up in England. Now he's Episcopalian, not much of a Christian. He has a couple sons. And they meet a traveling preacher out of North Carolina by the name of Samuel Harris. Samuel Harris is not that Sam Harris, but Sam Harris is a separate Baptist. I don't have time to explain that. And he's just going around preaching. This is around the time of the First Great Awakening, and or Second Great Awakening, no, First Great Awakening, one of those, First Great Awakening. And he gets converted to Christianity. He becomes a separate Baptist. Not only did Lewis, but also Elijah, Joseph, Jeremiah, Tolliver Jr., the whole family becomes separate Baptists, and 3 of them become ministers. Another one becomes a deacon. It's going to be an important story. And those 3 preachers all get arrested in Virginia. And as a result of persecution in the mid-18th century leading up to it, to the Revolutionary War, they flee to the state of Kentucky. Right there. And out of that comes the foundation of a lot of our states. You've heard me talk. One of those is Elijah Craig, who is the first pastor of Great Crossings Baptist Church and Stamping Ground Baptist Church. I've got his last will and testament in my office. Lewis Craig found South Elkhorn Baptist Church over here, as well as he planted a lot of other churches. He was influential in the conversion of William Hickman, who founds Forks of Elkhorn Baptist Church. Benjamin Craig is one of the brothers. He's a deacon. He finds Gent Baptist Church because of the Great Revival in 1800. That's what my article is all about. So I am here in Frankfort, a descendant of the Craigs, a Southern Baptist because they were. So it matters. Who you are is tied to who your ancestors are, who your father and grandfather are. I mean, after all, who is my mother and father but their parents? Who are my grandparents but their parents? And there is a lineage of faith that started centuries ago that I'm the beneficiary of. So maybe you've seen cases where you got a rough family, but one of them turns their life around. And you can see 2 or 3 generations down the road, you can see how God blessed that family because one person chose Christ or because one person abandoned Christ. This matters. Who you are is tied to all of this. Thirdly, because culture matters. This is the famous picture of Tower Babel. Culture matters. Language, dress, religion, customs define who we are. If you ever go out to eat with me, and I'm wearing a hat, I wear hats all the time because I have bad cow licks and combs don't work. When I sit down, I'll take my hat off. Not everyone does that. The reason I do it is because my mother drilled it into our heads. You take your hats off when you eat. Right? But I may be looser in some other things because you got to rebel somewhere, right? But I have weird things like how to fold towels. I made a joke about where man and I used to fight over things. I don't remember an example I gave. My sister said I should have mentioned the towel. I think you should fold so you have it vertical. You should fold it like that. Amanda takes it horizontal and folds it. That's just weird, right? Why do I fold a towel like that? It's because that's how we folded towels growing up. All right, now those are goofy examples. But let's say you're an immigrant and you speak French or Spanish or German or whatever, and you come to England or America or Canada or whatever, and that first generation, they're teaching their kids the language of their home, the customs of their home. What happens by the second or third generation? They're no longer bilingual, are they? It's one of the challenges of immigration. Unless, of course, you're in Canada. You have an entire province. Everything's done in France. Why? That's where they're from. We're not British. We don't do Boxing Day here. We're French. Right? Culture matters. So if you're a missionary, this matters. To understand America, this matters. The fourth reason why this is important, so I was going to look up a picture of Paul Chitwood, and I thought, I've got one with my ugly mug on it. Do you all know who Paul Chitwood is, this cat here? He is the president of the International Mission Board of the Southern Baptist Convention. If you're familiar with David Platt was the previous president. David Platt's a well-known author, speaker. David Platt is who I had your daughter listen to his sermon because he's got a lisp or something in his voice. And I wanted a speech therapist to help me understand what's going on. But this was I was on the mission board. I'm done with it now for the KBC. And his last official day as the executive director and treasurer of the KBC, the mission board went up there, we threw a party and all stuff. His first pastorate was in the great state of Owen County. He pastored 2 churches. Now, if you want to talk about legacies here, the first church he ever pastored was a small church called South Fork Baptist Church on your way to Gratz, in a town called South Fork. Why is that significant? My mom and dad, I believe, were saved there. Now, Chitwood wasn't the pastor. He had just left. And I never knew this world. You know, I know some of my dad's stories. He's a rough guy. He loved to fight, right? If he was bored, he'd start a fight, right? Short guy, but quick, you know. And mom started going, invited the preacher over, and if they ever watch this, I'll apologize. But dad invited the preacher in and offered him a beer, right? You know, it's my house, you know. And dad eventually started going and got saved. Paul Chitwood left. I remember South Fork. I was a little kid, but that's not my home church. I've preached there a few times. Paul Chitwood ended up being the pastor at First Baptist Church, Owington, where he would go on Somerset and some other places. First Baptist Owington is where my parents now have their membership. And First Baptist has been very influential in their life. And the pastor there is a close friend of mine who I really look up to. This matters. The whole reason I have Paul Chitwood up here is because the International Mission Board matters. What's the whole point of the Tower of Babel and really the Bible? It's to show how God blesses the nations of the world. And we believe that happens through the gospel of Jesus. All right. What up? So we mentioned young earth creationism, Lane. And I don't expect you to have an answer to this. So Peleg, not to be confused with the world's greatest soccer player, Pele, he was around when the earth was divided. I don't know if Creation Museum talks about that or not. Okay, well, anything I can dodge? Any ideas you guys have here? Anything you see? This is literally everything I know about chapter 10. Good stuff. All right. I'm going to get my face off there. Good. Okay. How about we stand up and pray, and we'll be dismissed.